Year 11s. Today we're going to be revising for your higher writing exam in Spanish. Today I'm joined by Señorita Castro and Señorita Lee to give you lots of tips and hints to help you in your revision. Here are the dates for your November mocks. The writing is the first exam that you will do this time and it is worth 25% of your overall grade. However, don't forget that the phrases you revise for the writing exam can be reused for your speaking. The great thing about the writing exam is that there are no tricks. They are not trying to catch you out like we sometimes see in the reading and listening. In fact, the examiner just wants to see you using opinions, past tense, future tense and aim high phrases. I'm going to repeat this a lot through this video because it is essential that you get this right to get you the marks you need in the writing exam. As you can see from the grade boundaries from 2019 below, to get a 7 on the writing paper, you just need 32 marks out of 60. That's approximately half. Even to get a 5, you need to be getting 22. So we can all, if we are prepared for this exam, we can all get at least a grade 7 or higher on the writing. Make sure when you're going through this video that you pause and take time to practice the different techniques and different phrases that I give you. So of course, you need knowledge to be successful in an exam, but you do also need to think strategically. So we're going to look at some top tips for today for your writing exam. Starting with choosing the essay that you know the most vocabulary for. You get 2 options on question 1 and question 2. So read through the questions carefully and pick the one you are most confident on. Let's say, for example, one question is on environment and the other is about school, and you know more about school, pick that one. My favourite phrase is, don't show what you don't know. The examiners don't know that you've chosen school because you don't know much about environment, but you should be able to show off the things you do know instead. Secondly, memorising phrases at home and writing a checklist at the top of your exam paper is a really good technique to start with. We're going to look at in more detail today at how to create a checklist, and I'm going to give you lots of ideas of things you can include. You've also memorised some phrases from your speaking exam. This could be really helpful to you. Starting with question 2 is where we need to begin because it is worth the most amount of marks. Don't waste time on the questions that are worth less marks when you could be getting more from your exam on question 2. Next, when we look at the translation, we need to make sure we leave enough time for this, and we should be breaking it down into grammar points rather than word by word. The examiner is looking for you to show off your understanding of different tenses and more complex grammar. At the end of the exam, make sure you leave enough time to check for common mistakes, such as verb endings or adjectives, and to make sure you have answered every single bullet point of the question. Remember, on question 1 and 2, you have options to choose from, so don't waste time answering every question of the exam paper. Make sure you read the instructions at every part. Finally, making sure that you have used opinions, past and future are going to get you the most amount of marks. You must include all 3 of these things to get the most marks in the content for your essays. And like I said before, using your speaking exam can be really useful for this. We've done a lot of practice with creating good answers for your speaking exam. So if you've remembered certain answers from different topics, then use that. The examiners that will be marking your exams will not be marking both your speaking and writing in the real thing. So please use what you can remember in any part of the writing exam. Okay, so I want to go through some tips of the order I would complete the exam in. So personally, I would be starting with question number 2. This is the one worth the most amount of marks, 28 marks. This needs some creative and complex writing. So yes, you need to get in your basics of past, future and opinions, but you need to be able to show off some interesting and unique ideas. So I would start with this one. I would prepare my answers, and then I would move on to question 1. This is the 80 to 90 word crossover question, the same one that appears in the foundation. So it's worth less marks than question number 2, but still important that you include accurate examples of different tenses and opinions. Question 3 is the last one I would do, but I would make sure to leave enough time to go through that translation looking for the grammar points, as it is still worth 12 marks. When I've finished all 3 of those, I need to make sure I've left enough time to check my accuracy, but also that I've included the 3 most important things: opinions, past and future. I'm also going to check for things like adjective endings and the order. So have I put the adjective after the noun? Have I made it masculine, feminine or plural to agree with the noun? I would also be going through and checking verb endings and perhaps some basic spellings as well. Okay, I know I've said this before, but really the best preparation that you can do at home is to learn a checklist of phrases in Spanish that will definitely score you high marks. As you can see from the 2 French student examples below, there are 2 different ways of creating checklists. Now, the one on the left is somebody that is really confident with grammar, and they have just used symbols or codes for certain grammar tenses and things that they would like to include. Now, I wouldn't recommend this for everybody. This is for somebody that is really confident in their understanding of grammar. On the other side, on the right one, this person has used set phrases they really want to include. This one is definitely a good way to create a checklist, and they've used phrases from various tenses or opinions or other high-level phrases they want to include on that topic. You'll also see that they have labelled the bullet points with opinion, past or future, which I really like on this example. Ticking off the list of phrases you want to include is a really helpful tool because it shows you how many good phrases you have included in your answer. So these examples below are French because I would like you to think of the ones that you know in Spanish. So pause the video now and list any phrases you can think of that you would like to include in your checklist. In the later slides, we'll look at some other phrases you can include.
You have identified which phrases you know. Now let's have a look at some more interesting examples of opinions. For example, adding expressions like estoy harto o harta de or no aguanto look much better than aburrido or odio when giving negative opinions. For positive opinions, it can be more interesting adding me chifla or lo mejor es. And for some neutral opinions, I really like the one that says desde mi punto de vista or hay que ser honesto. Remember that adding these ones to your writings gives a much more interesting look rather than the typical ones like me gusta or prefiero. Now, pause the video and add your favorite words from this slide to your checklist.
Don't forget to add some intensifiers, qualifiers and frequency adverbs to your writing. Ones that I use quite often are bastante, de vez en cuando and a veces. Pause now and add your favourite ones to your checklist.
Organizing your text when writing makes it look clearer, and also the examiners will give you more marks if you extend your sentences. So make sure that you choose some of these linking sentences and add it to your writing as an interesting connective words. For example, I will add things like para finalizar or al fin y al cabo in order to summarize your idea in the text. Or you can also link your opinions as using por un lado and then por otro lado.
On the topic of opinions, we can think about how to extend our answers. We know that opinions must be used in questions 1, 2 and 3 for the writing exam, but giving a simple opinion is not going to get you as many marks as you would need to pass the exam. So we need to be able to extend it. One way we can do this is using the YMCA. The YMCA helps you to develop your answers as much as possible. We start with mentioning what you think, what is your opinion. So mention your idea. Then we mention someone else, for example, my friend or my family. So we could say, pero mi amigo, but my friend thinks something else. We can then contrast the idea, so give a different opinion to that of your friend or your family member, using sin embargo to say however. And finally, we add any additional information we can think of, such as examples, using también to say also. For example, we've got me encanta ir al café, that is your opinion. Pero mi madre me dijo que son demasiados caros. But my mum told me that they are too expensive. That is mentioning somebody else. Sin embargo, ella no puede cocinar. However, she can't cook. This is contrasting the idea. And finally, we are adding information with también no como nunca en los restaurantes, saying also I never eat in restaurants. So this is a much more developed opinion rather than just saying I love going to the cafe. So if you are a little stuck on how to develop your answers, think of the YMCA. We need to think of some basic opinion phrases that we can use in any situation. You probably already have some that you use regularly, but I've got a few examples for you now. We can use sentence starters such as honestamente, hay que ser honesto, según mi amigo, or para mí. We probably know some adjectives and some other opinion phrases as well, but to make your opinion stand out, we could use some intensifiers such as tan, bastante, muy o realmente, or even un poco. Thinking of some adjectives, there are many adjectives that are similar in English and Spanish, such as fenomenal or super, but we can use other ones like genial, maravilloso, la leche, or even soso or aburrido. Have a few adjectives that you would like to use in your opinions in your head and get practicing your opinions for your revision. Okay, on to the past and future phrases. So past and future must be used in question 2, and you should be starting with some simple ones that you can really get accurate and show that you understand past and future tenses. Then you can go on to use some more complex ones, perhaps some ones that you've memorized and included in your checklist. So let's have a look at some simple past and future tenses that we can include. We could start with some preterite tense past, such as visité, I visited, hice, I did, comí, I ate, and bebí, I drank. These are all past tense phrases that you've been using for a long time now in your Spanish learning, and more recently in our lesson when answering the register. Remember, when you are using the past tense, it is really important to try and include opinions in that tense as well. So we could use a phrase like fue to say it was. Something you could do to make it better is to try and talk about other people, especially on the higher paper. We need to show off that we can use other people when talking about verbs. So instead of just visité, we could say visitamos, or instead of fui to say I went, we could say fuimos to say we went. Try to use other people in your past tense where you can. but start off with the ones that you are most confident on. To make it even better, in the higher papers you need to be showing off other types of tenses. Recently we've looked at something called the imperfect tense. We could use a sentence starter such as cuando era pequeño or pequeña to say when I was little. This would be followed by something in the imperfect tense. There are two simple ways that we can do this. We could start with me gustaba or solía to say I used to like or I used to do something. Both of these phrases would be followed by an infinitive. So we would say me gustaba visitar. I used to like to visit. Or solía comer. I used to like to eat or I used to eat. Alternatively, we could just use the verb in the imperfect tense if you remember how to use it. So comía would be I used to eat something. We could say jugaba, I used to play tennis. Or visitaba, I used to visit Spain. If you know some of these verbs or you want to include them in your checklist, pause, practice with them now. Okay, on to the future tense. We have some set phrases that we've used many times in the past. We could use something like me gustaría to say I would like, me gustaría ir, I would like to go. Or we could use voy a to say I'm going to. For example, voy a visitar, I'm going to visit. Both of these again are in the first person to say I am going to do something. So to make it a little bit more impressive to the examiners, we could say vamos a to say we are going. Or va a to say he or she is going to do something. Alternatively, if you know some simple future, which is a more complex future tense, such as iremos to say we will go, then please include that. If that's not your strength, then stick to the things that you know how to do. It's better to show what you know than what you don't know. Again, using opinions in the future tense will help develop your answers. So using será to say it will be useful. You could add some high-level phrases, just like we did with the past with cuando era pequeño. We could use a high-level phrase in the future to say si fuera rico, me gustaría, plus an infinitive. This would say something like, if I were rich, I would like to something. Again, using something like sería to give an opinion and say it would be will extend your answers and show off to the examiner your range of vocabulary. If there are any new phrases here, pause the video, write them down and practice with a range of topics. Think about the themes that we've covered and practice using them as much as possible.
Make sure that you show off some aim high phrases to sound just as Spanish as me. When I was in Spain, my friends and I loved to use phrases like sin importar lo que hagamos, estoy harto o harta de, nunca pensé que me habría gustado, aunque sea difícil, siempre vale la pena. So make sure you add some of those in your exam because those were the ones that gave us the higher marks in our Spanish exams in Spain.
Question number 3 is the translation. This is a translation of a short paragraph from English into Spanish. I want to go through a few things from the specification and some other things that are mentioned to examiners who are marking your writing exam. First of all, it's about the individual sentences that are ordered in increasing level of difficulty. This means that they are testing your grammar knowledge from more basic structures to the more complex ones. The other thing I want you to remember is that students are not expected to produce perfect, error-free writing. This means the examiners are not expecting you to have a perfect level of Spanish, but they are expecting you to attempt and have a go at every grammar point. If you do so and still make small mistakes, you can still access the top marks for this translation question. The difference is that if you make an error that only has a small impact on the understanding, then it won't make much difference to your mark. But if the error you make is a little bit bigger, then it might bring your marks down a little. So it is always worth having a go and not fearing making those mistakes. Finally, to get into that top band of marks, It's about the meaning of the passage being fully communicated. So this does not mean that every single word and every phrase has to be translated exactly the way as it says in English. Instead, you need to make sure that the meaning is communicated. For example, if the English translations want you to say, I went somewhere, but you can't in that moment think of the word for I went. Instead, you know how to say I visited. It has a similar meaning and could still get you the same marks. So use other language that you are comfortable using and you know that you can confidently get correct in order to get you the correct marks. Let's have a look at some example translations and work through some of the common grammar points. Let's have a look at an example translation question. This one we've got here is about el trabajo, the theme of work. So if you look through this text, you'll see, or this paragraph, you'll see that it is varying in different grammar points that they want you to translate into Spanish. So the first thing that actually we start with is a past tense, saying last month I travelled. Now again, if you can't remember the verb to travel, but you remember I went or I visited, the meaning is still the same, and that is a perfectly good translation to include. So we've started with the past tense and we've then gone on to see the word a famous actor. This here is actually testing your understanding of word order in Spanish. Do we know that the noun comes before the adjective? So instead of saying famous actor, we would say actor famous. Then we go on to say some opinions. I enjoy working as a journalist, so we want to see the use of me gusta, for example. Let's say we've forgotten the word for I enjoy, but we do know how to say I like or I love. These would be good alternatives as well. Then we can see some future tense ideas. Now it's got here, my dream is to become a teacher. But when you're translating this, I want you to think about phrases you do know how to use. So say for example, we can't remember the word for my dream, or we don't know to become. Instead of worrying and leaving spaces that we can't fill in the gaps for, we need to work around it and think outside the box a bit. So when you say your dream is to do something, what we're saying is that we really would like to do it, or we hope to do that one day. So perhaps we can rearrange that and say, in the future, I hope to be a teacher, or to work as a teacher. The meaning is still there, and we're saying it's something you'd like to do in the future. You probably won't lose many marks for this, if any at all, because you've translated the meaning of the phrase. Later on, you will see there are some more complex tenses, such as I would have to do. Now, if you look at this carefully, this is using the conditional tense to say something that would happen in the future, and it's using the verb tener, to have to. Thinking in this way will help you to answer more of the translation into Spanish. It's about translating the meaning. Why don't you pause the video here, have a go at translating, and don't leave any gaps at all. Try and work your way around anything you are a little bit stuck on. Pause the video, write your answer, and check it in a moment. Okay, here is the answer to this one. So as you can see, we start off with a past tense verb saying viajé, to say I travelled. We've got un actor famoso, to say a famous actor or actor famous. Then we've got our verb phrase that uses the infinitive disfruto trabajar, I enjoy to work or I enjoy working. An alternative for this could be me gusta trabajar. Later on, we've got the dream to become a teacher. We've got mi sueño es hacerme profesor. However, you could alternatively have here, me gustaría mucho ser profesor. I would really like to be a teacher. Later on, we've got that conditional tense of tener. So this is slightly irregular, this verb. This is one that we need to be able to recognize. It is tendría, to say I would have to. Let's have a look at another example and see how we get on with that. Okay, on to another translation. You can see on this one, on the topic of school, we start with a simple sentence to say, my school is in the town centre. So we're using the verb estar to say the location. We're also looking at modes of transport. Should be a simple phrase for us to use at this point in year 11 to say, I go by bus. Then we go on to, within the same sentence, using a different person of the verb. Instead of saying I start or it starts, we're saying we start at 9. So they're actually testing your understanding of using a different person within that tense. Do we know that when a verb is a we verb, that it is often an amos or emos? On the next sentence, there is a really common thing here that they are checking for. It's your understanding of something called comparatives or superlatives. That is things like better than or the best. So we need to know phrases like the best or the worst, which have come up earlier in this video. Please feel free to go back and have a look at some of those. Again, we're going on to the past tense, saying last year we enjoyed, but they're making it more complex by using the we form of the verb. And the final part of the paragraph is in the future tense again, but we're using quite a lot of infinitive phrases. I want to pass my exams. I would like to continue studying, and I hope to improve it. So this paragraph is really testing your understanding of infinitive phrases in Spanish, something we're going to look at after this one. Pause the video, see what you can translate, and then let's check the answers. And here are the answers. See how much you got correct. As part of the translation question, something that comes up often is modal verbs. Now, you may recognise these verbs, but perhaps not the word modal. These are verbs that use infinitives immediately after, so such as I am able to go, you want to do, etc. So the three most common ones that come up on the translation are these. So starting with poder, meaning to be able to, we know this verb in English by saying I can do something, you can do something. But the infinitive form of this is to be able to. So the common ones that you probably have seen before is puedo, meaning I can. But if we want to change that to say he or she can, we say puede. Remember the phrase donde se puede, where you can. If we're seeing this in the past tense, we want to say I was able to. Now this is actually the same in the third person to say he or she was able to, so it's a good one to remember, podía. And then finally, looking in the future tense, this could come up as I will be able to, podré. On to deber, meaning to have to. You might recognize this word actually from deberes, meaning homework. In Spanish, they use this because deber means to have to do something. Homework is something you have to do. So in the present tense, saying I must or I have to, we would say debo. Again, changing it into the third person to say he or she must, we say debe. So notice puedo, debo, puede, debe, both using an E on the third person. The past tense follows the same pattern as podía. It's debía, I had to do something. Again, this works for the third person. He or she had to do something. And then the future tense, we're actually going to use the conditional here and say debería. Now this would be used to say I ought to do something or I should do something. And the final one I want to look at is querer, meaning to want to. We have used this one quite a few times recently with the topic of work and future aspirations. So when you say I want, we're going to say quiero. Notice there's a little bit of a spelling change in the middle there, quiero, to say I want. If we want to say he or she wants, again, just like the other two, we're going to swap the O for an E and say quiere. Then in the past tense, we're following the same pattern as before, podía, debía, quería, to say I wanted to. Again, it could be used for he or she wanted to with the same spelling. And the final one Actually, we're going to swap for a different verb here. So something you need to remember with translation is that as long as the meaning is translated correctly, then it doesn't matter if it is exactly the word that we need to use. So if we're thinking in the future tense for to want to say I would want to in the future, we could also say something like I would like to, in which case we'd use the phrase me gustaría. Remember, with all of these modal verbs, we're always going to follow with an infinitive. That is, I can go, using ir, to go. Or I must visit, uses to visit, visitar. Or I want to work, using trabajar. As we've seen on the other slides about translation, it is common for us to see in that question a phrase that it needs to use an infinitive. We've just looked at 3 examples of modal verbs, the really common ones, and hopefully you've written down some notes and practiced with some of these new phrases. Now, I'm going to share with you some other phrases, usually verbs that include an infinitive straight after, and a few of these you will probably recognise from our lessons or from other writing or translation practice that you've done in the past. I have included, however, 3 or 4 potentially newer ones that could come up in your translation question, so it's worth writing them down and practicing with them now. I would recommend that you pause the video after each one is revealed and practice with it using an infinitive. Remember, an infinitive is a verb that uses an AR, ER or IR ending. So that could be ayudar, to help, it could be comer, to eat, or it could be vivir, to live. So let's have a look at some examples. First of all, we've got puedo, one of our modal verbs from the last slide, I can. Suelo, meaning I usually or I tend to do something. Quiero, another modal verb meaning I want. And debo, another modal verb that we've just looked at, meaning I must or I have to. Me gustaría, one that we've used many times, probably since about year 7 or 8, meaning I would like. Espero, something we've come across recently in the theme 4 on the topic of future aspirations. Acabo de, this is actually a new one that we're going to be looking at in the next topic as well. This means I have just. We use this to say I have just done something in the past, and it's a really easy way to use a infinitive phrase which looks like a much more complex tense in English. I have just been, I have just visited, I have just worked. That would be acabo de ir, acabo de visitar, or acabo de trabajar. Practice with this phrase and use as many infinitives as you can think of. Another one would be voy a, in the future tense to say I'm going to. Tengo que, to say I have to do something. This is an alternative for debo. So in your translations, if you can think of tengo que instead of debo, then this is a good alternative to use. Disfruto or me gusta. We all know me gusta, we've used it many times before, but disfruto might be a new one for you. It means I enjoy. We would follow this with an infinitive. For example, disfruto jugar al baloncesto. I enjoy playing basketball. Decidí. This means I decided. Now this verb could come in a variety of tenses. We could say he decidido to say I have decided, or voy a decidir, or just any other tense as well, or any other person. But this is saying I decided to do something. And finally, the last one is not really a verb, but it is a phrase that we would include an infinitive after. We have seen this one before in year 10, and it is para, meaning in order to. For example, para ayudar, in order to help, or para visitar, in order to visit. Pause the video and practice using some of these with your common, well-known infinitives. Well done, Year 11s. You've made it almost to the end of the video. Hopefully you've been pausing the video and making notes or practicing along with the slides that we have been explaining to you. The final thing that you could do for your revision is using the platform Vocab Slam. This is just for you guys at the Regis School, so make the most of it. At the moment, we've got an area of Vocab Slam called Exam Zone. On here, you'll find various different things you can do ahead of your exams, such as photo description, practicing opinions, past tense, and other grammar topics, as well as some aim high phrases to really boost your marks. So get practicing on this before your writing exam. Well done, Year 11s. You've made it almost to the end of the writing exam revision. But just to remind you, the writing exam has no tricks. We are not trying to catch you out on this one. In fact, the examiner just wants to see you showing off your opinions, past, future, and aim high phrases. If you remember, like we looked at the beginning, on the higher paper, we are looking to get at least 27 marks to get a grade 6 or 32 marks to get a grade 7. That's approximately half the marks that you need. So if you have prepared and you have revised and made a checklist and practiced your opinions, past and future tenses, then you are going to be fine. Now it's up to you, Year 11, to show off everything that you know. Thank you for listening to me, Señorita Castro and Señorita Lee, and buena suerte!